What I'm asking you to do is to obtain 5 articles from the scientific literature in psychology that, together with the 3 articles that I've already given you, will serve as the foundation for your Project 1 background section or introduction section, literature review, if you like. And so what I want to do is just take a couple of minutes to give you some ideas, some tips and best practices for searching the PsycNET database. I realize that for some of you, you may not need this because you've been active in searching the database in various kinds of ways and for various reasons. But for some of you, you may be rusty, and so I'll give you some perspectives on how to do this well. From the home page, you go to Library, you go to Databases A to Z, and then you scroll down to APA PsycNET, which is right there. It brings you to the search field. The first thing I want to illustrate is the use of quotes. I'm going to go ahead and put in a search for mental illness and stigma, because that is, of course, the topic of our Project 1. I'm going to go ahead and do this without quotes, and I want to show you what happens. I'm going to put the 2 in, hit search, and then it comes up with well over 3,000 results. Now, I think you'll notice, though, that if we put quotes around mental illness, something different is going to happen. What it was doing before is it was searching the abstracts in the database in which the word stigma or mental or illness appeared. But by putting quotes around mental illness, you're going to be asking the database to give you results in which mental and illness occur together as one coherent kind of search. So if you do this, I think you'll find that the number of hits will be fairly substantially reduced, and it is from 3,000 all the way down to 2,500. And so use of quotes is a nice way to, first of all, to more sharply focus on the topic of mental illness, and second of all, to minimize the number of results that you obtain. If you use what's called a wildcard search, I want to illustrate this too. I'm going to remove these quotes, and I'm going to go down to stigma, and I'm going to put an asterisk beside the A. And what this is going to do is it's going to look for results in which any word that begins with STIGMA comes back as a hit. So that could be the word stigma, that could be stigmatized, that could be stigmatizing, and that could be maybe even a small number of others. What it was doing before without the wildcard is it was just looking for the word stigma and stigma all by itself, and only the word stigma. But if you search here, I think we'll find that we increase a little bit from 3,000 and we get all the way to 3,500. So use of wildcards is likely to increase your search, the number of results that you obtain fairly dramatically. Let's go to how do I narrow my search? And this is going to be a desirable thing to do, of course, because we've already said that that search before mental illness and stigma yielded around 3,000 or so results. You probably have little interest in searching all 3,000 to figure out what's most relevant to you. So there are ways to narrow your search. And the first one I want to talk about is this one here that says using index terms. Inevitably, it's going to be the case that when you do that search for stigma and mental illness, if all it's doing is it's looking for the word stigma or mental or illness, you're inevitably going to get results that are not that relevant to the topic of stigma as it relates to mental illness. It could just be the chance, just by coincidence or something, that those words appear, even though the content of the paper has very little to do with those actual topics. But if you use index terms, you're going to avoid that problem. I'm going to use an index term here, stigma, and I'll use the index term mental illness. And that's going to bring us all the way from 33,000 plus hits all the way down to about 600. And so if of these 600, we can pretty much guarantee that given these index terms, that these are results that are, or these are papers that are really squarely relevant to the topic of mental illness as it relates to stigma. So that's a really helpful way to narrow your results. If you narrow by author, you'll find that you can, and that's the second one down, you may have a reason to look for papers only by a certain author that are, for instance, a person who's especially reputable, especially big in the field, and who's published a lot of really good stuff. Maybe you're interested in only papers by this person here, and if you do this, it's going to bring you all the way down from 3,000 total down to only the 28 that this person has authored. Of the original 3,000 from this original search of mental illness and stigma. Narrow by publication type, that's down here. You're presumably going to be looking for only stuff that's published in journals or peer-reviewed journals, as you can see here. You don't want dissertations, you don't want books or edited books or authors, because I'm asking you to look for empirical articles, that is, articles that publish the results of empirical research, and that happens pretty much only in journals, really, so you're very likely going to want to narrow your search to look at stuff only published in journals. Narrow by year. If you want to find stuff that's been published very recently or in the distant past, then you can do that here. For some reason, I don't know, maybe you're interested in stuff that's been published in 2012. and if so, you'll get what the database will do is it'll give you only the 295 hits or papers that were published in 2012. Narrow by age group just seems a little bit less relevant to what we're doing in the class, but you can do that here if you're interested in stigma as it relates to mental illness among especially people in their adolescence or childhood, school age, very old. You get the idea. Then you're welcome to use the age group narrow to accomplish that. Narrow by methodology, this is likely to be much more relevant to what we're doing. I've already said before that I'm asking you to obtain articles that report results of original empirical research, and what kinds of papers does that happen? Well, that happens in empirical studies. You're not going to be looking for results of or papers that report outcomes of interviews or focus groups or case studies, things like that. So pretty much only empirical studies is what you're going to be wanting to look at here. Although I will say this though, literature reviews are here. There's 188 total hits, and literature reviews can be a really fantastic way to learn about a research area, because of course the purpose of a literature review is to summarize knowledge, all knowledge obtained really to date on a given topic, and so by doing that you can learn a great deal about this area. I'm going to ask you for the 5 articles that you actually obtain, though. I'm asking you to include no literature reviews in there. I'd like them all to be empirical studies that report results of original research. Not that the literature reviews are not important or not useful. In fact, they are quite useful. But I want you to keep the focus on only articles in which that are reporting results of original research. And then narrow by tests and measures. This may not be terribly relevant to what we're doing either. But let's say it's the case that you want to find articles that have measured mental illness using specific kinds of scales, or you want to find articles measuring stigma in certain kinds of ways, for instance, using the internalized stigma of mental illness scale, whatever that is. And if you click on this one, it's going to bring you to only the 75 results from that original search of 3,000 or so in which that particular tool has been used. I want to just say one other thing, and that's that all these options are available in the original search page. If you go back here, I would just do this, and using these menus, these drop-down menus right here, you can accomplish all those same things using these menus. I just kind of think that using doing the search first and then narrowing on the second page, on the results page, I think is a little bit easier and a little more intuitive, and so but you can decide for yourself what's best. I want to also point out that you can add rows to the search form. You can do that by this. So if you want to use more than just 2 keywords or search terms, I used before mental illness and stigma, but you want to include others, then you can use as many as you want. Once you obtain your results, let me just go back here and put this back in, do the search. Once you obtain the results, there's a little bar here that allows you to do a lot of pretty useful things. You can save your results, you can print the results, you can either email them to yourself for later reference, and so that's something that I do a lot, and it's a pretty useful thing. I want to show you the cited by link. This one is really, I think, especially nice. I'm going to do a search for one of the papers that I've already given you that's going to serve as the some background for study 1. That's this paper by these authors, Mehta and Farina, and it happens to be the top one, and it's called "Is Being Sick Really Better? Effect of the Disease View on Mental Disorder on Stigma." If you go to this little link right here that says cited by 103, so it turns out that the database is telling you that there are 103 other resources, that could be chapters, books, mostly articles probably, that have cited this particular paper. And so it stands to reason, I think, that if another paper is citing this one that we already know is really quite relevant to our aims and our objectives in our project, then these 103 themselves might also be very, very relevant too. So I would ask you to pay special attention to the ones that appear, to the articles that appear in the cited by section here, because I think that you'll find that there may be a lot that will be really nicely relevant to what you're trying to do. And so I'll have you take a look through those and figure out which, if any, of those are also relevant to our study and could work as a nice background for the study as well. Another thing to say is scour reference lists. When you obtain these papers, so for instance this one right here, we've already decided this one is very relevant to our aims. Not only is it the case that other articles that cite this one could be very relevant as well, but it's also the case that articles that are cited by this one, by the Mehta and Farina paper, could be very relevant too. So if you scour those reference lists, you might find a lot of good stuff that's also really tightly linked to our topic and what we're trying to do here. As always, practice is really important. The more you do this, the better you get at just figuring out little tricks and little ways of getting to results that are especially relevant to what we're trying to do. And then the last thing I think is really important. This says don't simply select the first 5 references that emerge in your search. You'll pay for it in the end. If we go back here and we just say, if you decided to get lazy and you just say, well, Thibodeau's telling us that we need 5 articles, I'm going to do this search right here of this 3,000, and I'm just going to choose the first 5. And I'll just submit those, and my work is going to be done. Well, the problem is if you don't put a great deal of thought into these articles, and if you just sort of like choose them in a haphazard sort of way, when you read these articles, and eventually you'll have to, of course, when you read these articles, you may very well find that they're just not very relevant to the topic really at all. So you want to make sure that you avoid that. You want to make sure that you read the abstracts closely, and that you confirm that the articles are in fact very relevant to what we're trying to do. Because if they're not, when it comes to the business of writing a background section with articles that are not relevant to the project, to the paper, then of course your life is going to be impossible. You're just not going to be able to do it. So I would strongly encourage you to resist the impulse to just select, throw darts at the thing and just select articles in a haphazard sort of way. Make sure that they are really relevant to the paper, and if they are, then your job of writing the eventual introduction section of the paper is going to be dramatically easier, I think. So that's a few things, a few tips. If you have any questions, of course, I'm always here, and so that'll do it.